respectful of everybody's time. So, yeah, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Viterbi Innovation Partners Bay Area. This is one of our Salon series events. My name is Ken Klein. I'm a USC alum. On the board of the Viterbi School of Engineering and also a USC trustee, and one of the founders of VIP Bay Area. And I just want to give you some insight as to why we created VIP. We saw, I would say, a gap in the market relative to really three areas: connection, collaboration, and community around USC Viterbi friends, families, alums. And we wanted to basically create a great place with great content for us to gather and form good connections, valuable connections to USC, both in terms of plugging into what faculty are doing research, and also include a social aspect to what we do. We've had events at multiple companies like Amazon and NVIDIA. We've done wine tastings, and now, given the world we're living in now with the Salon series, which is really all virtual. So on the Zoom call, we have other Viterbi Innovation Partner board members. I see David Lane, so welcome David Lane, Natalie Klein, and of course Natalie Vase, who really helped put this event together. So thank you, Natalie. And then also, of course, David Jang, who's going to be our master of ceremonies. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to David so you can pick it up and take us through the logistics and get us started, David.
Great. Thank you, Ken. As Ken noted, we've been doing the virtual series vis-a-vis an online format just because COVID hasn't allowed us to get together. Just as a reminder, this event will be recorded and will be posted later on. If you have any questions, please feel free to put it in chat. Introduce yourself, your year, your name, your company, your role, just so we all know who everyone is on the call. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get to you as soon as we can. And when you're not presenting or talking, please put yourself on mute. At this time, I have can you move to the next slide for me? Thanks. At this time, I have the great pleasure of introducing Natalie Vase. She has had a great career in product management, starting first starting as a solutions engineer at Oracle, then moving to Internera as a director of product management, then moving on to Google in a product management role in their cloud group as well. And now she is a partner out at Amplify Partners. And with that, I will pass it to Natalie. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, David. So thank you for that introduction. Now it's my job to introduce some of the panelists that we have. I think actually if we could keep the slides up, it might be helpful just to keep maybe the bios. I recently actually just left my career in product management to start at an early stage venture fund. And I wanted to do an event that brought together other people that had started in engineering roles and moved their way into product management as a career track. So we have 3 different panelists today who I'm super excited to introduce, all at different phases of their product management careers at some really, really exciting companies here in the Bay Area. So with that, I'd love to have actually each of these panelists introduce themselves, starting with Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Stillman. I graduated from USC in 2012, and I studied biomedical engineering. Right after USC, I actually joined Teach for America, and I taught high school math in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Shortly after that, I worked at Raytheon as a software engineer for a few months, and then I transitioned to an operations engineer at Amazon Robotics in Boston. The company was formerly called Kiva Systems and was acquired by Amazon in 2012. Then I went to business school at Stanford, and after business school, I joined Snowflake as a product manager. I'm currently working on our data sharing and data marketplace product.
Thank you, Stephanie. Markus, we'll go ahead to you.
Cool. Hey, everyone. Super excited to be here. My name is Markus Mar-Liu. I graduated USC in 2015. I studied astronautical engineering, and afterwards I worked for a few years in aerospace, primarily on the defense space systems. Currently, I am a senior product manager at Cruise. Before that, I was an engineer. Actually, I started as an engineer at Cruise. And a bit about Cruise, that Cruise is focused on launching a self-driving car service here in the Bay Area and across the nation. And part of that, machine learning is a critical aspect to be able to detect objects, predict where they'll be in the future, and then chart a path through them. And so my teams are focused on building the machine learning platform that powers all experimentation and development for Cruise engineers.
Cool. Thank you, Marcus. And Neil.
Hi, everyone. My name is Neil, and I graduated from USC in spring of 2017 with a bachelor's in computer science from Viterbi. After graduating from USC, I joined a company called Palantir, where I initially started off as a forward deployed engineer. As a forward deployed engineer, I worked really closely with large commercial companies and various US government agencies to improve their operations and decision making. And after about 3 years at Palantir, I left to go join a startup called Persona as a product manager. And at Persona, we're building an all-in-one identity platform to enable businesses to verify users' identities and securely manage their sensitive PII. And one of the core capabilities of our platform is allowing customers to connect to thousands of authoritative data sources with one single integration. And so that's what I serve as the product manager for at Persona.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. So as you can see, the thing that we all have in common here is that we were Viterbi students and eventually made our way into product management roles through a variety of different paths. So that's why I'm super excited to have everyone who's on this panel share their insights on how they got to where they are and what that transition was like, and also, what their work entails from the day-to-day. So to actually start off, I would love to actually have each of you share what the day-to-day looks like being a product manager at your respective companies. I'd love to start with Stephanie and then Neil, who both are working at software companies, and then Marcus, move to you because your work is more tailored on an internal facing role. And so I'd love to contrast that. So Stephanie, if you don't mind kicking us off, I would love to hear what your day-to-day looks like at Snowflake, how you're splitting your time, and what anyone that's considering a role in product management would have to look forward to.
Definitely. So the first thing I'd say is product management is an extremely cross-functional role. So in any given day, I could be working with product marketing, legal, sales engineering, enablement. I really could be working with anybody at the company. So that's one thing that's really exciting about product management. But a typical day usually starts off with some sort of stand-up meeting with my engineering and design counterparts. So as a product manager, you are very closely working with design and engineering, and we actually call ourselves a trio, and we really make all decisions together because any decision that you're making is going to have design and engineering implications. So we start off the day with some sort of stand-up, and then usually we end up going into some deeper dives with engineering for specific problems that we're working on. Now we're all virtual, so we might have virtual brainstorming sessions. And also usually we have some sort of customer calls where we're trying to plan for the next feature that we're releasing. So the first part of the product phase is really the exploration phase. And so you want to kind of define the customer problem. And the best way of doing that is actually going and talking to customers. So I would say probably 50% of my time right now is spent on execution, and then another 50% is spent on strategy and planning for future products that we're going to release.
Awesome. That sounds more familiar to what my experience was like at Google, a larger company. I know Snowflake is public now. It was very different than my experience working at a startup. So Neil, I'd love to move to you and share what your day-to-day like is like at Persona, which I understand is a fairly small company. So wondering how that might be different for you or similar.
Yeah, in a lot of ways it is similar. So definitely working cross-functionally with the engineers and designers on my team to scope out work and execute against it. I'd also say though, yeah, working cross-functionally as well with the customer success and sales team to understand the feedback we're getting from the front lines. And on top of that, it's conducting a lot of user interviews. So because we're an early stage company, part of it is finding product market fit. And so while we do have a few other products which are more established, I would say what I'm working on is earlier in the life cycle of most products. And so as part of that, I'm really, want to be in front of customers and prospects and really understanding, what are their pain points. On top of that, it's hard to answer from a day-to-day perspective, but more from a week basis, I would say it's also kind of strategizing on our go-to-market motion for launches that we have coming up and thinking about kind of the pricing for each of the products that we're thinking about releasing. And also add on maybe like a function of kind of the role I'm in at Persona is also, negotiating partnerships with other companies to see how we can leverage their data for our platform. So a lot of similarities. I would say the day-to-day is less routine and more sporadic. And obviously, if there's like a problem that's come up, it typically means firefighting and taking care of that.
Cool, thank you. And Marcus, super interested to hear for you working on an internal product at Cruise, what that's like for you.
Yeah, not to reiterate what people have been saying, but I also think it's fairly similar, at least categorically. I think that there's a few nuanced differences, and maybe if I could break down my day or maybe an average week, I think it breaks down into 3 parts. One is execution. This again is like talking with stand-ups between engineering, our design team. It's also being an internal product that's focused on the platform and my users here is within the company. It's also factoring in like user feedback that we're getting live. The iteration cycles that we're shipping at are going to be on the order of weeks or sprints. And as a result, we get feedback really quickly from internally. So we want to factor that in into our execution and pivot where we need to pivot and double down where we need to double down. So as a PM, I'm providing the customer voice as we're releasing new features or we're iterating on existing products. Part of this too involved is like release notes and making sure that we're able to like structure things properly. And the second part, like exploration, this is mostly around like dog fooding products, assessing build versus buy to see how the competitive landscape looks like. Can we supplement our platform by competitors or like external vendors? And the last part around it is like strategy, just is mostly around product requirement documents, making sure that we're set up to forecast where the company is going to be and need to be in the next 3 to 6 months to a year, and aligning with leadership that this is the direction that we want to scale our platform and in order to meet the needs that we foresee customers to have in the future.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And all of you sort of touched on the role that you have to play that's internally facing, which is with the engineers, but also cross-functional, but external to the customers. Having also worked on an internal platform team at Google for some time, there's a misconception that you aren't user facing, but you are. It's just that your customers are within the company instead of outside of. So definitely a lot of similarities there. Well, you've all, transitioned maybe semi-recently into product management within the past 4 to 5 years. I'd love to go around and hear at what point in your career did you become interested in product management, and how did you make that transition from another role? Stephanie, I'd love to start with you since you actually transitioned out of grad school, and then we will move on through the same sequence again.
Yeah, so going into business school, I knew that I didn't want to be an engineer anymore. I didn't want to be an individual contributor engineer. I loved it, but I think I realized my own limitations, and I realized I was probably never going to get to the point where I was a principal engineer and that was my life's passion. So in business school, we learned a lot about product management, and it really was kind of the perfect blend of business and engineering. The reason I say that is because you do need to understand the technical limitations of a product and understand how a product is built, but you aren't the one that's actually building it. And so it's helpful to have your engineering background so that you can understand the context and empathize with engineering and design. But you take a new lens and you actually look at, where is this product going? Why are we building it? Who are we building it for? And so you take a more holistic approach to building the product. So, in business school, we learned a ton about this. I felt like this was a perfect blend of the business skills I was acquiring, but my desire to not move too far away from technology, because I knew that, my engineering skills would definitely be valued. And that's what really made me make that decision.
Oops, I was muted for a second. Cool. Thank you, Stephanie. Markus, I'd like to move to you next because you transitioned uniquely within the same company from an engineering role to product. So how was that decision for you, and what piqued your interest about product management enough to make you switch over?
Yeah, it's a great question. And maybe I can paint a picture of like me starting off at Cruise about 3 years ago. The company was just hit 400 people. So large for a startup, small for like a Fortune 500 company. And I started as an engineer, and the problem that we were trying to solve was around like how do we measure safety for all these new ML machine learning features that we were adding to our vehicle. And so as an individual contributor, as an engineer there, I had this opportunity to really build out a team. And as we were solving this problem, what I kept coming across was this question around why. Like, with such an ambiguous space, like how do we measure success for an autonomous vehicle? We always want to tie it back to like why are we building this like new tool? Why are we building this new feature? How does this connect back to overall where the company wants to go? And as I was digging more into these sort of questions, and as we're scaling up the team, I found that I was really drawn towards like guiding and like being that intersection that translated like the direction of the company to like boots on the ground for how do we actually get there. And so the key differentiation that I was making in my mind was that as an engineer, I was really trying to work on the how, like how do we get there? And as I was like growing the team, I think that I was more drawn to the why and the what we were trying to build. And I think that coming from engineering, I had this perspective of like being able to balance the two. And as Cruise grew, I felt that I can have a larger impact, being able to continue to translate those needs across the company and for different stakeholders down to like engineering as well. So it was I transitioned after about a year or two at Cruise, and have grown the team since then.
Cool. Awesome. Neel, next to you, would love to hear what the transition was like coming from Palantir. Also, maybe you could explain a little bit about what a forward deployed engineer is. I know that's sort of a unique thing that in many ways Palantir sort of invented. And I'd love to see how that, got you interested in what the process was like going straight into a product role at an early stage company.
Yeah, absolutely. So at Palantir, a forward deployed engineer, I'd say it's a role that's most akin to a sales or solutions engineering role. I would say, I think that's one thing Palantir maybe did really well, is kind of coming up with a nice fancy title for some of these roles. But as a forward deployed engineer, I was really working very closely with customers to understand their problems and pain points, and identifying new use cases for them to be leveraging our platform. At that time, it was the Palantir Foundry platform, and really building out new features to help them tackle these new use cases that we had in mind. And so if the product development team at Palantir was kind of solving for the 90%, the forward deployed engineers were really solving that last 10%, the last mile, and how can we really address these gaps in the product for these different customers. And I would say in my current role at Persona, there's actually quite a bit of overlap. I'm still constantly speaking with customers to understand what their pain points are, and kind of thinking of new ways to creatively solve their problems with our platform. And I guess in this case, I have a bit more agency, because if there is a gap that we identify, it's kind of seeing what we can do to address that gap, with the features that we have planned out on the roadmap. I'd say a couple of key differences is, I think at Palantir, I was really focused on one customer or a small set of customers. And so my lens was much smaller, and my aperture of what I'm looking at and kind of the feedback I'm getting is less. But now as a product manager, I'm really working across, the entire customer base that we have, and also speaking with a lot of prospects that are interested in the Persona platform to understand kind of what they're looking for. So I'd say those are the differences. And when I was basically transitioning or, thinking about making the move from Palantir to a new company, I actually wasn't sure exactly what role was going to be most exciting to me post Palantir. I felt like I had a collection of skills and doing a lot of different things, whether that's actually coding and building out new features, talking to customers, talking with different prospects. And so for me, it's actually quite a bit of self-reflection to think back, what did I like most about my role at Palantir? Was it actually building out these new features and coding and getting into the nitty-gritty details? Is it talking to customers, synthesizing those user problems and communicating that to other stakeholders at the company? Is it thinking more strategically? And so I think upon that reflection, I kind of realized, well, the things that I do like actually line up really well with the product manager role. And so I think for me, when I started that process of basically looking at different companies that were exciting to me, and I guess maybe I'll get to this later on, but for me, I was really optimizing more for the company rather than the role. But as the conversations progressed with the company, it really seemed like I had a good fit for that PM role. And a lot of the skills that I had at Palantir transferred over really well.
Cool, thank you. So you all have sort of touched on, not only the path to product management, but what skill sets are necessary for that. How did studying engineering help or hurt in becoming a product manager? And what are some of the other skill sets that are very important to foster in product management roles? Let's go ahead and start with you, Stephanie.
So I would say the most tangible skill that I got from my engineering degree that I've applied every day is just the ability to break down complex concepts. The product that I work on is very, very technical. And when I started, I really had no idea how databases worked. But I think my engineering degree gave me the confidence to know that even though it looked insane and scary and intimidating, I knew that I could learn it if I just spent enough time and kind of drilled into the details and asked for help when needed. I could learn it. And so for me, that's been my saving grace. And now I feel like I know databases, which is amazing to say. And in addition, the engineering skills that I learned, even in the few coding classes that I took as a biomedical engineer, helped me understand when engineering tells me about a problem that they're facing. Like, oh, this parameter is no longer functioning. And I'm like, oh, okay, I understand how that works. So I may not need to build it. I can at least, like I said, empathize with the engineers and understand what problems they're facing. And I think having an engineering background definitely gives you more credibility with your team. Because if you're, while you can ask questions, if you have them, it definitely helps if you somewhat know what you're talking about, and they understand that you do have a technical background, and if you needed to, you could roll up your sleeves and dig in. So
cool. And then Stephanie, what other skills I think you touched on kind of empathy, like empathy for the engineers, empathy for the customers. What are other skill sets that you might have picked up along the way, whether that was business school or in the current role, that you find are really helpful for being a product manager?
So I think in engineering, we often look for a specific answer. And the most frustrating thing about product is that there is never a right answer. You can talk to 100 customers and they can tell you 100 different things. And you're going to have to somehow pull data together, make a decision, and then influence everybody else at your company and convince them that that is the right decision, even if you're not sure, to be honest. So you use your engineering skills in terms of analyzing data and bringing that to people, but you also need to kind of be willing to learn with your customers, and also, like I said, empathize and really try to understand what problems they're facing. Like I said, there isn't always a right answer with product, and so I guess honing in on your ability to put together a strategic presentation and have supporting data and influence those people at your company that are actually the decision makers is something that if you are doing in another job will definitely serve you well in product management.
Yeah, awesome. Markus, how about you? How has your engineering, what you studied, helped or has not helped at all, and where you ended up in product management, and what other skills have been very helpful?
Yeah, I think that Stephanie touched on a lot of great ones. I'll try not to overlap too much there, but I completely agree with what she was mentioning. I think, so I studied astronautical engineering, and I think at the core of it, what it was teaching is around like systems design and like systems thinking. And the relevant, like, when we think about this, it's about, a satellite has multiple different components that need to fit together. There's some interface between these different components, and each one might have its own design cycle and its own iterations that need to all fit together at some point in time. That's very similar to I think how, at least when I'm looking at internal products and platforms, that we're approaching this problem as well. So a lot of different aspects of the platform, each one being developed somewhat asynchronously. And we need to align people on what value each one is bringing and when, and who's going to ultimately be working on it. So I think in that regard that, engineering has enabled me to break down, like Stephanie's mentioned, break down these problems into bite-sized actionable pieces in order for us to give clarity to the engineering team regarding priority and when we should be building what. I think that there are certainly some intangible sides as well that I actually think I got uniquely from USC engineering, which I think has put a little bit more emphasis on not only being an engineer, but also being an engineer that can communicate these ideas and being able to be able to be personable in this regard. And so in product management, what I'm often finding is that there's an element of zooming in and zooming out. And so when you zoom in, you really need to be able to understand the root of a user's problem, but also be able to zoom out and communicate this idea and synthesize this for all of the external stakeholders and leadership in order to guide their decision making. Where engineering has really helped in this zoom in, zoom out mentality has been in really understanding and digging into the why a user is having a certain problem. We find that sometimes users are saying hey, I really wish I could have X in the platform. And what we want to really tap into is, why do you want to have X? What is the problem that you're running across? And that problem might be a common problem that we're seeing across a lot of different teams. A lot of different machine learning teams might have the same problem, and what they're suggesting is just articulated a little bit differently. And as having an engineering degree helps you understand and have those in-depth conversations to be able to really distill outside of their suggestion into that root of the problem. In a kind of a similar sort of vein, we have when you're planning and you're basically guiding and helping your engineering team, you also are able to utilize a technical background to assess where there's risk in your roadmap. So if you want to see hey, we want to ship X, which is a highly complex feature, having a technical background helps you break down what parts of that might be risky. So you can flag hey, we might need to spend more time and really scope out this piece of work rather than just saying, hey, bottom line is we'll deliver it all by X, and engineering team gets burned out or they're don't fully know the scope of the problem.
Yeah.
So,
that's super interesting. I also have a question in the chat from Lucas, who I think this would be a good question for you, Markus, while you're on it. His question was, have any of you found yourselves missing IC technical work since transitioning to the product side?
Me personally, I have not. I've realized as I've grown as a product manager that I'm not the best engineer in the room. And I will say that I think coming from an engineering background, there's a tendency, at least I have a tendency, to jump at times, think about oh, what if we did this? And you want to think about the solution. And so I have to catch myself and think about, okay, actually, the engineering team is the best one suited for this. And what I'm here to do is help articulate what the problem is that we're trying to solve and the priority for each of those components of it. So to answer the question around do I miss being an IC, I think that overall, net, I do not. I really enjoy the product manager role. I think there's times where I am envious of some of the clarity of as an engineer, I can focus on this one thing and make that really good and deliver that and say, hey, I've delivered these 10 things this week. And as Stephanie's mentioned, in product, it's a little bit more ambiguous. There's never really one right answer. And so you're constantly iterating on ideas and strategy to make sure that it's the right one. It's the best one that you could put forward with the data that you have.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you. Neel, we'll have you answer the same question. And maybe you can also hit on this other question I see in the chat, which is how important are soft skills and how have you developed them?
Yeah, definitely. I think Stephanie and Markus gave great answers. I think for me, my engineering background, and I studied computer science at USC, was supremely helpful and valuable, even to this day in being a product manager. It's allowed me to communicate with the engineers that I work with on my team, I think, much more effectively. And I think there's just an added sense of maybe credibility that I have on the team, just because I can communicate with them and understand kind of some of the technical details there. And so it definitely has prepared me really well. And I think technical intuition, and it really depends on the product that you're working on. So I want to say that, but at least at Persona, it's been super helpful in the way I've kind of been able to manage the team and think about the strategy. Some other things that I think are super important, I think it's like being able to communicate with your team really effectively, being able to communicate also with external stakeholders. I think a lot of that, I would say, practice, or where I was able to really develop that was at Palantir. Kind of the nature of the role is that we're basically sitting desk side next to one of our clients and just kind of watching them use the software, and being able to engage with them in a really direct way. And so I think just having lots of experience doing that across multiple different customers and at different clients, in both in the commercial space and government space, really helped me develop those soft skills. And I think also having, you need to put yourself in those situations and in those environments to be able to develop those skills. Otherwise, it's not going to just come out of nowhere. And so I think looking for those opportunities at your existing company or at new companies or outside or elsewhere is really important to basically improve in those areas, is what I'd say.
Yeah, all those things resonate a lot. I remember when I first sort of started to understand what a product management role was, one misconception I had is that you're a manager. You're not managing people, you're managing a product. So more frequently than not, as you grow in seniority in product, you're actually not managing more people, you're managing more teams cross-functionally. And one of the hardest things I found was that, none of these people report to you, but you must influence them to kind of get behind what you're doing. And that's a very different dynamic than being a people manager. And so I sometimes felt, especially at Google, where the company was so big, that I was a politician too. And I was like, okay, I have to get everyone on the same page. I can't offend anyone. The decision isn't going to make everyone happy, but we still have to get everyone behind it. There was, that was definitely something I felt at a big company. And then there was this ongoing joke at Google that PMs were expensive email routers because everything had to go through us. That's a little tongue in cheek, but I think that kind of speaks to the fact that you're very nodal in like the communication network within a big company, and you have to be able to communicate super well cross-functionally. I'm going to move on to another question that's in the chat, which is, what advice do you have for people who are looking to break into product management or starting their first product role? What do you wish you knew before you started your first PM job? We'll go back to you, Stephanie.
This is a really hard question because I read all the PM books beforehand and tried to prepare as much as I could, but actually just the role, how you learn. I read the Cracking the PM Code, which I'm sure everybody has read, and it is helpful in order to kind of just organize your thoughts so that when somebody asks you product questions, you know the right questions to ask. But really, I don't feel like product management is rocket science. It's a combination of, people skills, technical skills sometimes, and like the ability to influence. So, what I would say for somebody looking to break into product, there are a ton of product blogs out there that you can read and just start thinking like a product manager. Stratechery is one that's really great that I read. And that kind of helps you to start thinking like a PM, especially if you're an engineer. You're probably just not asking yourself those same type of questions as the PM is asking themselves. So yeah, that's what I would say. Start reading some PM blogs, try to start thinking like a PM, and just, when you see a product, think about how you can improve it. Think about, what people are doing with it, what more they could be doing with it, and things like that.
Cool, thank you. How about you, Markus?
Yeah, I think that I want to +1 on Stratechery and the corresponding Exponent podcast that Ben Thompson has. I think that those are phenomenal resources. What I keep going back to is that there isn't, like, when you ask somebody what they do as a product manager, you oftentimes get a different answer for every person that you talk to. And I think that just speaks to like the range of what you can do as a product manager. To some extent, like, this role is one that's relatively nascent. That hasn't been around for 80 years or so. And as a result, there's a lot of different versions of it. And so perhaps my recommendation would be to talk to as many product managers as you can. Whether it's like a cold email or like, just like grabbing like an info set with someone who's in your company who's a product manager, or just reaching out to your network to folks who, you think you would want to be a product manager at this company or in this industry, and just get a sense of like what they do day to day and how, like Stephanie's saying, how they're thinking. Along the lines of like how they're thinking, I think there's one thing about product that I've come to see is that there's different frameworks for making decisions and assessing priority and structuring a roadmap or structuring a strategy. And so like, on one hand, understanding those frameworks is really, really important. But what is invaluable is being able to apply those frameworks. So step one is like maybe understand a few of these frameworks. There's ones like RICE for like prioritization, and Decode and Conquer has a few of these frameworks as well that Lewis Lin puts in there. But really, if there's an opportunity that you have to like either have a side project to like really spin up and apply these frameworks, work within the existing company you have, where you can start to take on smaller roles that are product related. All of these things will help you build a product muscle in order to, one, figure out if you really want to do product, and two, start building the skill set in order to like make that transition if that's what you choose to do. Alternatively, like one route that I did take was I did do a session with Product School. It's a paid session with a product manager from industry. I chose to go with a group, like a director of product from Uber. He also was doing infrastructure at Uber, so I felt that there's a lot of alignment there. Previously was at Twitter and Yahoo, so also like I think he's had some pretty good product experience, and that really helped me kind of like calibrate myself against what other product managers in infrastructure or in internal tools were doing as well, and how they were thinking. Product School has a free option. A lot of these other like X schools have free options to like just go to sessions without having to pay, and so that also is an opportunity to just again get more data points on product managers and see if this is the right fit for you.
Hey, Natalie, do you mind if I weigh in and crash your
Please do.
crash the parties for a second? Just two recommendations in terms of books. If you've never heard The Mom Test, it's fantastic, by Rob Fitzpatrick, and also this book too, if you can see it, The Lean Product Playbook by Dan Olson is really, I think, kind of the Bible when it comes to product management. So
I also see that Gonzalo put in something in the chat, inspired how to create tech products customers love. So it seems like there's a lot of different things out there. Neel, what about you? Any additional thoughts here?
Yeah, +1 to what Stephanie and Markus mentioned. Totally agree with that. I think one thing to keep in mind though is the PM role looks different at every single company. And I think there's also a lot of different flavors of PMs that have different specializations. And so I would keep that in mind when you're looking at different PM roles, because some are maybe more oriented towards growth and like marketing type strategies. Some are maybe more technical. Some are geared in another completely different way. And so try to kind of get a sense of which one is most interesting to you. And I think one thing I wish I knew as well is I do think there's a lot of really valuable resources online, but I think it's important to look at them through the lens of where that company was in their specific life cycle, and remembering that what works for maybe a 2,000 person company won't work for, in my case, a company that has less than 50 people. And so I think something that I wish, because when I'm reading all of these resources and doing the same thing, Stephanie and Markus, and reading all these blog posts and kind of trying to gather all of this knowledge, it's trying to figure out when do these not apply to the company that I'm working at. Because I think it's easy to see all of these and say, oh, I think I could try this framework, I could try this one. But I think answering the question of when these don't work, I think will really help you in thinking about, okay, actually, I don't think this works for maybe the company that I'm looking at or the role that is exciting to me.
Yeah, I think one thing that I wish I knew before starting in PM, or that would have been helpful, is like understanding that you get credit and blame for a lot of things that aren't like anything to do with you. And you in many ways are a backstop for engineering. And so you sort of have to protect engineering from, all the requests that might be coming from sales, but you also have to protect sales wishes too. And so you're balancing a lot of priorities. And, if there's downtime on your product that was caused by something from the engineering team, it's often like the PM's job to communicate that to the customers. And so, you are kind of taking responsibility and accountability for a lot of things that have to do with the product. And I think that's, some people like that, and it can also be hard and high pressure at times as well. And then, as Neel said, I think the flavor of PM looks so different depending on if you're in a consumer company, something like Snapchat or Instagram, Facebook versus enterprise. And I think most of the people here represent more of the technical enterprise products, but that's, completely another route to consider too, which would be consumer. Let's see, the next question I wanted to ask was, you've all had different launching paths. You've had different things that have launched you into product management. Do you see product management as like the end game for you in your career? Do you want to like stay in this role and develop in that role? Or do you see yourself maybe moving to other disciplines within the company or even within a different industry? Go ahead and start with you, Stephanie.
So I personally I've only been in product for 2.5 years, and I would love to stay in product for at least another 5 years. I just feel there's so much to learn, and every single day I'm facing a different challenge that makes me uncomfortable, that I haven't faced before. Being pushed to provide a strategy for something I don't really know much about. And so, it causes me anxiety, but I also realize that in that state I'm growing. That's one of the things that, made me leave engineering. Is in my current role, I had felt like I'd really gotten everything out of it that I could get. And in this role, even after 2.5 years, I'm still learning so much. And with each new project and as the product I'm working on develops, I feel my role transforming. And so the role that I'm doing today is completely different than the role I was doing when I started. And so I do feel like I still have a ton to learn. So I plan on staying in the role for a while.
Cool. How about you, Markus?
Yeah, I think that I'm in a similar boat. As mentioned, there's a lot of different flavors of product as well. So growth and as a product manager might mean growing as, in my case, an internal tool or internal platform PM. Also can mean like, working on like something more consumer facing in different industries. And as we kind of mentioned here as well, each industry might have a different flavor of PM within that too. So I foresee myself growing and expanding like the product muscle across both like in industries as well as internal versus like consumer facing or growth PMs, etc. I think that the other alternative that I would consider is that I think when I look at founders of companies or et cetera, I think that there often are like they are the first product manager of that company. And so if there is like a market opportunity, I think that that's something that I would entertain as well. But in the absence of that, I think growing as a product manager is something that constantly comes with new challenges. I think there will always be a ton of growth. And so that's one thing that I'm optimizing for, is that continual growth. And I think that product management provides the perfect balance of that.
Awesome. Thank you. And Neel, last but not least.
Yeah, I do see myself staying in product, I think, for at least the next 2 to 5 years. However, I think the product manager role is really unique in that it creates a lot of optionality down the line to kind of pursue other career paths if that's interesting to you. So I think those could include something similar to you, Natalie, and even going into venture capital, because I think as a product manager, you're doing a lot of similar strategic thinking that I think you're doing in the VC space. But also to what Markus said, that also includes like going out and starting my own company one day if I find a problem that I'm really excited about tackling. I think you do see a lot of founders that come from a product background, whether that's as an engineering manager or even like a product manager background, because they've been spending so much time doing that.
Yeah, I do see a lot of founders these days who have had product on their resume at some point, because I think it was you or Markus or one of you said this: you are the product manager of the company. You're the first PM if you end up starting your own thing. Also, for anyone that is exploring being a product manager, side projects are a great way to get that same experience. You'll be product managing and software engineering on the same thing collectively. So we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to just go around and get kind of closing thoughts from each of you, and then also open it up to any questions that we might have. So, Stephanie, Markus, Neel, if you guys have any closing thoughts, pieces of advice for people kind of considering jobs in product management. We have a lot of most of this call, I think 80% is alums from Viterbi. So anyone that would be, considering a job in product management, any parting wisdom for those people?
If I can start again. What I would say is product is a hard industry, or I guess job, to break into. So don't be discouraged if you're trying to get a product job and the first 5 companies or 10 or 20 companies tell you no. For some reason or other in product, they're always looking for somebody who has product experience, and they're not always quite as friendly to people who don't, but there will be one company or many companies that are willing to take a risk on you. So just definitely don't give up, and just know that product managers come from all different types of backgrounds. So really, no matter what job you're doing right now, you absolutely have skills that are transferable to product management. And so just hone in on that story. And like Markus said, talk to a bunch of other product managers, learn what they're doing, and then tailor exactly what you've been doing at your job to how that can apply to product, and you will be fine.
Cool. Markus or Neel?
I could jump in. Yeah, I think that if I could think about like one kind of piece of advice to work on, some people I think are naturally good at communicating, but in product, communication is so critical. And it seems like such a simple concept, but how you communicate with different people will change. How you communicate different ideas changes. How like the right medium to communicate is different. And so one thing that I might recommend is that if you're looking to enter into product, I think an important thing is being able to craft that narrative for why you're interested in product, how your skill set is relevant to not only product management, but also the company or industry that you want to enter into. And at the end of the day, I think that, like as everyone's mentioned here, product takes on different roles in different companies. I have friends who are product managers who never even look at like any part of code. They live in and out of a spreadsheet and Google Docs, and then that works. That is what the company and the industry needs of them. And so even though we have this technical background, I think most of the people here have this technical background, I think that gives you an advantage. I think that the important thing is communicating that advantage to the company or the industry that you want to join. Showing that this is an advantage for this company if they brought you on, and how you can leverage it to find insights in the product or find insights working with this team that otherwise would be difficult to find. I do think that technical product managers or people with a technical background that become product managers will be the future. That's a biased opinion on my part, but I think that as we see companies grow, more and more they have to have a technical element to it. So I think that coming in with a technical background already is like a big plus.
Yeah, I would say, I think I would try to work backwards. So if you feel like you do want to break into product management and obviously like switch into that role, really reflect on the skills and your strengths today and map out kind of where maybe some of those gaps are from where you are today to where you want to be in the future, and figure out a plan for you to develop those skills. Because when the interview time comes, they will ask you, oh, like, can you share a time where you've worked really closely with customers, or can you give an example of communicating with different stakeholders, within the company? And so I think there's a lot out there to, for people to know like what to expect. But I think not enough people do the planning and the work to kind of think about how to build up their own experiences to really map to what is expected at that point in time. And I think if you're able to do that, I think you'll have a much higher likelihood of success in being able to kind of get a product manager role.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Markus, Neel, and Stephanie, for sharing all your insights. This was incredibly helpful, I'm sure, for all the people that we have on the call. And David, I will pass it back to you to just do final closing remarks.
Awesome. Mehdi, can you bring up the slides for me real quick? All right. Well, thank you guys so much, Natalie, Stephanie, Markus, and Neel. We really appreciate you guys volunteering your time and energy to make this happen. I just want to send a reminder out that, USC VIP, Viterbi Innovation Partners, is really focused on building community, connections, and collaboration. And this is a great example of Viterbi alums coming out to, help support the community and give us their insights on product management. I want to note that we are all built as a community of volunteers. So if you're interested in volunteering, joining our events, and or speaking at our events, please let us know. Please send an email out to Maida. Her contact information is on the slides listed here. And also, if you could respond back to the survey that Maida has just posted in our chat, that'll be fantastic. We take a lot of feedback from these events to iterate and make sure that we make a better product for everyone here. And for any future events, please go to our link here that you see on the slide at the Viterbi School to see our future events. At this time, I want to thank everyone for joining today. I really appreciate the speakers for coming out and supporting us, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone at our future events. And hopefully one of the new ones will be in person. So really looking forward to seeing everyone finally in person. Have a great day, and thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.